Good morning and welcome. This is Sunrise Daily. I'm Ayo Makinde.
Hello and welcome. It's Sunrise Daily on Channels Television. I am Bukola Samuel Wedimo.
Well, coming to you live from the nation's commercial capital. I'm Kayode Okikiolu.
Are we still on this? Just get over it. Good morning from Abuja. I'm Malkwe Ogun Yusuf.
And talking about Abuja, I mean, I don't even know where to start. The Abuja-Kaduna or Kaduna-Abuja route is getting very, very interesting, both on the roads and on the rails, Kayode.
Absolutely. And, well, the latest for the road is that sad accident which claimed the lives of many. And this is, I mean, this is all the more worsened by the fact that a lot of people can't go via the rail. I'm going to get to that. So, I mean, you know what happened on the Kaduna-Abuja rail, corridor just, how many weeks ago? It's barely 2 months or thereabouts, where there was an attack and eventual kidnap. So a lot of people have to naturally go via the roads, right? You know, the Abuja-Kaduna road was notorious for not just accidents, but mainly attacks by bandits. So a lot of people moved to the rail. The rail stops now, they're back on the road. The airport is definitely expensive. Don't forget, we had another attack at the Kaduna airport some weeks back. So now the government is trying to reactivate the rail, and understandably, because it's been off for some time. People are taking the road, which is dangerous, not just the fact that they have tried to fix the road, but for security reasons. But now that the federal government says May the 23rd is the day that they will resume rail activities, the family of those who were abducted during that attack are saying, well, no, that is not the time. Now is not the time, especially because our family members are still in captivity. It's a different mix, really. You have the federal government saying, well, it's not as though we're not aware that those people are in captivity. We're not trying to gloss over this. In fact, the word that was used is we're not being nonchalant about this, but they say that the work has to continue, as it were. Transportation has to go on, and while they try to rescue those people, they need to ensure also that the rail is revived of sorts. So the question is, how right is the decision of a government in the light of the argument? I remember Bukola was telling me about this argument that was put forward, saying that the passengers have not been taken to their destination. I mean, those ones that were abducted. And I think, is that a fair argument, really, Bukola?
Well, you can't blame the families, for saying that they're they're certainly frustrated. And I'm glad we're talking about this this morning, Kayode. You know why? Because last week a report came from the families of the abductees. They had convened a press conference again, and one of them in agony said that Nigeria has moved on, but they have not moved on. Nigeria is already talking about politics, already talking about the economy, already talking about expensive expression of interest forms, but they are still in agony. And I felt my conscience being poked right at that point. And if it's any relief anyway, one of the abductees released recently said that they were well taken care of, particularly during the Ramadan. The Muslims among them were fed, when they broke their fast. But does it significantly reduce their agony in any way? I doubt that it does, because their family members wake up every morning with the pain, with the uncertainty about how their loved ones are doing in captivity. Now, one of the questions that the families of the abductees are asking is, has that situation room been convened as directed by the president to initiate plans and strategies for the release of their family members? That situation room, I don't know if it has been convened. And the Minister of Transportation in charge of the ministry, overseeing the Abuja-Kaduna rail route, has resigned because he's campaigning for presidency. Where does it leave, the plans for the rescue of the families of the abductees? Those are critical questions that must be asked, particularly if reports, have been confirmed. We don't know if it's true. Those reports are true, that there's been another attack on that route, you know, the one that Kadi was talking about, Abuja-Kaduna route. And then if operations will resume on the rail line, have security surveillance equipment been installed such that new travelers will feel safe traveling on that route? These are valid questions that we must ask this morning. Maokwe.
Indeed, Buki, you're right on the money in terms of the questions that you have raised. But in terms of the minister who has now resigned, the Minister of Transport who's resigned, there's a Minister of State, Ms. Gbemisola Saraki is the Minister of State for Transport, and I believe that she can very well take on the responsibility of ensuring that those who have been kidnapped by these kidnappers, I mean, to ensure that at least the NRC complies with the directive of the president. If the president has given a directive for them to liaise and open a situation room, giving updates to those whose loved ones have been kidnapped, and that is yet to be accomplished, then, you know, there are big questions to ask as to, you know, who's calling the shots here. Because if he's giving directives and it's not happening, it could be tantamount to insubordination. I'm hoping that she will take up the responsibility and ask questions of what is going on. It does raise a very big moral question for us all, because I will ask myself, if it will be right for me, much as I'm thinking about my own safety, and when I mean safety, not just in terms of security now, but also in terms of you know, accidents and what have you that you normally will have on the road. You just confirmed that there's been an accident this morning that we were able to confirm. There's been also reports of terrorist attack, which we're waiting to confirm. Excuse me. But then there'll be questions as to whether we could all travel in good conscience, knowing that those who traveled on that train are yet to be returned. I understand why the NRC might feel a burden to resume, but the truth of the matter is it does raise a very big question whether you can resume in all good conscience, if institutions have consciences at all. Even if those institutions do not have, those who operate the institutions should have consciences. That at least we can say, let's bring back safely or take back safely those who we carried on this. And that's a very powerful argument to make, that those whom you carried from one point, you're yet to deliver them safely to another point. How can you then say you want to start another journey again? There are big questions in that regard, and I'm hoping that is one that will you know, accuse the consciences of those who have responsibility to bring back these people from the den of bandits.
The only question that I want to ask is, who is talking to anybody? I have always contended that the major challenge we have is that of communication. Who is talking to the parents of the children abducted from Kujama 318 days ago? Who is talking to the children, to the families, to the relatives of the people abducted on that train? Who is talking to the people who get abducted almost on a daily basis in various parts of the country? Who is aware of what is happening? We do not want to preach fear, but we want to ask government to take responsibility and be held accountable for the things for which they were employed. That is the whole conversation around what we're talking about this morning. We want to resume service, most certainly. The world, life cannot come on pause for one reason or the other. But if we do not communicate and help some people get closure to the issues of their lives, we're only leaving some wounds open. Let's take a look at this little clip.
It is disheartening to hear this from Nigeria Local Operation, you know, because our people are still in captivity and they are talking of resuming operations. It's the height of insensitivity. It is the least we expect from NRC. We don't expect to hear that from them now. They should concentrate all their efforts on securing the release of our loved ones in captivity. Today is the 50th day they have been in the bush. In fact, most of our members now, many of them are going insane. I can tell you that because I interact with them. The president made it very clear that they should be giving us a minute-by-minute account of the efforts of government in rescuing our relatives so that this can calm us down. We have not had a word from them since that time. It's 2 weeks now. Nothing has been done. We are going to have a comprehensive response to this their press release by tomorrow. And we are not happy about it at all. And we are not going to, we don't agree with them, and we are insisting that they should not resume services. They are on social media. They are seeing the comments of Nigerians. Nigerians are not ready for this. Nigerians are angry. In fact, I can tell you authoritatively, some of our members now are almost going insane. There was a member that wanted to commit suicide. He's an adult. His wife is there. He feels life is meaningless. He wanted to kill himself. What of the people in captivity? How are they feeling? What is their condition now? Their mental status, their physical status, their psychological well-being. All these have been disrupted. And yet you are talking of resuming. Is life not more important than revenue that you're going to derive from resuming services? Just one Nigerian life, a Nigerian citizen, is more than all what they are thinking they'll get from the service.
The first pick this morning of the papers is the Daily Trust newspaper. On its front page, 29 die in Kaduna auto crash, Kano explosion. 2 escape from Kaduna tragedy as bus rams into truck. Kano residents, government security agencies disagree on cause. Adults, children injured. All of that you'll find packed on page 4 of the paper this morning. Now, of course, the picture on the front page is that of the scene of the gas explosion at Sabongiri in Kano just yesterday. And right above that one, bandits abduct schools on Kaduna-Abuja highway. And all of that, of course, getting attention this morning. Right under the picture on the front page, presidential tickets, APC, PDP delegates raking millions as aspirants scout for votes. And guess what? There's a quote. It's our season to make fortunes. Find that story on page 3 of the paper. Wike gives cars to party chairs.
That particular one caught my attention. I was thinking about it. When children are still quite young, you ask them, what do you want to be in future? They tell you, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, an engineer, a teacher. And I imagine children these days saying, I want to be a delegate. Just on a lighter note, because it looks like one of the most lucrative jobs now, being a delegate. And I think it's quite important to actually look into that economy, or that subsector, if I can call it that, because they are the ones that eventually decide, or at least throw up the candidates that Nigerians would elect at the election. So they're actually very important people right now. So I think it's important to actually look through and say, just how are these people selected? What's their pedigree? Really, because they would select for us, essentially.
Well, Kadi, we have to be very careful here so that we don't legitimize the fortunes that delegates would make, because the future, the destiny of Nigerians are practically placed in their own hands. It's a form of electoral college, so that needs to be scrutinized such that it's not monetized. But if we go ahead and pretend that that system of electioneering has not been monetized, we will be deceiving ourselves. So.
Which is why we should actually look into this, pay more attention.
For which reason we should be asking, because these are the people that decide who become candidates. Are they asking questions? Are they asking about the pedigree, qualification of whoever wants to get into whatever office? Because they are literally shortlisting the people that we want to recruit into government. They are the ones that are shortlisting. Okay, where you want to get employment, like 1,000 people, and you need to shortlist. So these are the delegates they're the ones that are doing the shortlisting. So
a second look and another at delegates. From Daily Trust, we'll move to the Nigerian Tribune this morning, and the paper is packed full with stories. But let's take a look at the big story first. 10 days to presidential primaries. Southern PDP leaders weigh fresh option. Perhaps that's in the process of choosing the candidate. From there, let's move to the left-hand corner, which has an array of stories. I am not running to be president. AFDB president Additional, who cleared the air yesterday on his purported ambition, and he has said he's not running. U.S. vows to impose visa restriction on promoters of violence. That's ahead of 2023 election. Stop IPOB from using your platform to incite violence, FG tells Facebook. I think another paper carries it as though the FG saying that Facebook is favoring IPOB. And at the bottom you find ASU strike, military men shoot in the air to disperse protesting Ondo students. And let's move to the bottom corner. Confusion persists over delegate selection as APC inaugurates panel. And lastly, before we exit the Nigerian Tribune, gunmen list 10 Anambra local government areas for attack. That's unsettling, and I think that should be looked into. Kadi.
Well, definitely. Heads up, you might say. Well, take a look at the Guardian newspaper, and this is what you find. It's a build-up, of course, so you understand why you have this one. Presidential primaries intrigues as PDP loses Eagle Square to APC. I know, right? You're wondering how. What does that mean? Well, let's see if the writers explain that one. Mark leads convention panel to inspect NKO Abiola Stadium. It looks like that will be the option for the PDP. Or Tom Jonathan meets Wu's ex-president to attend PDP convention. That's still the elephant in the room, by the way. The status or otherwise of the former president. PDP shifts governorship National Assembly primaries to avert defection of aggrieved aspirants. Akiwumi opts out from APC presidential race. Ruling party tasks screening committees on justice to all aspirants. That's the big story. But there are a few pictures on the front page which I'd like to speak to. And one is from the nation's capital, the other from Kano. The one on top shows President Buhari just right after the meeting with the Oluwabori. It was a private meeting, so we're not quite sure what the details of that meeting are just yet. But just under that, you see children, pupils of a primary school in the aftermath of that explosion in Sabongeri in Kano. It was just a very, sad incident.
We really hope to get some understanding of what happened there, because the lines are still quite blurred. But let's hope that soon we'll get some clarity.
Exactly. Even though the police, even the vice president was there,
everyone has spoken,
the deputy governor and all that say it's a gas explosion. But it looks like the residents are saying, well, we're not quite convinced.
It's a bit more than that.
Yeah.
But being not there, being just reporters ourselves, we're just gonna have to wait, and wait it out and hear exactly what the real issues are. Because
and considering that community is Sabongeri, non-Hausa communities, that's what Sabongeri means. But let's not make any suggestions right now and wait until information comes out as to what exactly happened.
I'll take this one for you. Dollar breaks 600 naira to a dollar ceiling ahead of party primaries. So it looks like which is why, again, we should look into that economy. So it's been said that there is so much, demand for the dollar right now. You know what happens with the demand and supply? If there's more demand, little supply, the price shoots up. And you wonder, these people are not importing anything. It's not like they're trying to buy raw materials and stuff like that.
You just borrowed into my mind. How much does a businessman get? Mark,
there you go. It's all yours.
I hope you weren't throwing me a question.
No.
The only thing I was going to say, is that there is an upside to young people saying that they want to be delegates when they grow up. And that's the fact that at least they even know what delegates are. They're taking an interest in politics. When you were that age, I'm sure you had no idea who a delegate was, or whether, what role he or she played, assuming you even knew, that there was, a process called, or, people called delegates in a political process. So that's certainly an improvement. But now what they know it for is another kettle of fish. But, we have to look on the upside and see just how it is that we can continue to project that upside, letting people know that, they need to act as the conscience of this nation. 2023 is really a crucial time. Take a look at this. The Vanguard newspaper is also focusing on delegates as well. 2,340 APC delegates to elect presidential candidate. And then you also find the ellipsis there. What are the conditions? You find the details on page 5. 44,000 145 for governorship candidates. Fate of superdelegates hangs. New arrangements favor emergence of northern candidate. North has 1,257 delegates. South has 1,068 delegates. Over 3,000 state assembly aspirants for screening. Give me ticket, I'll beat any PDP candidate. Tinubu urges APC delegates. Tinubu may dump APC if skimmed out. That's according to an associate. So you find all of those riders to that particular story, which is about the delegates. You know, somebody tweeted once and said that, you know, there was a delegate election about to take place, so you had to take a form, and the form cost 20,000 naira. So if you wanted to really have a say, all you had to do was be a member of a political party and pick up a form at the ward level to, you know, run to become a delegate. So they are the real power brokers, if you ask me. Page 5 is where you find details. You've been seeing all the aspirants traveling around the country trying to meet the delegate, and there have been threats that if you don't come to meet us, we will not vote for you. But I wonder how many votes will eventually go to each aspirant. Let's see how that goes. You also have this, how to make national development plans work. Ekpo, Atedo, Peterside, others at Vanguard Economic Discourse. You find out on pages 20 to 21. You're not doing enough to stop IPOP from inciting violence, like Mohammed tells Facebook. That is also there. It's delusional arrogance. It's delusional arrogance to give any group conditions for existence. Presidency tells NEF. That story is on page 8. And just in case you're wondering how much is it 55 naira we pay now for account maintenance comes to, look at this. Accounts maintenance. Bank customers pay 25 billion naira in Q1 2022. Yes, you heard right. It came up to 25 billion naira in just one quarter that's the first quarter of 2022. You also have a number of other stories on the corner there, which I'd leave you to do yourself. There's also an update on the killing in Sokoto. Deborah, police declare suspect in viral video wanted. That story is also there. Mr. and Mrs. is also on the front page. I'd leave you to do that yourself, and I'll flip it right back to the crew in Lagos, gentlemen and lady.
Well, you see, Mark, that jam story is a very, very interesting one. You know, and Kayode, that's not the only economy to look at. Even that also.
Because I'm not writing jam. I was wondering why you called my name. I'm not writing jam.
You got me thinking also for a moment, but really, I'd like to have my account maintenance fee back. I can fully well maintain my own account.
Oh, really?
Yes, I can.
Including the technology that goes with it? I guess we'll see. Nigeria News Direct has this one, perhaps an update on the Jet A1 fuel story that we've been talking about for a bit. FG to sustain investment in aviation sector. Stories on page 21. If you're asking the question, how? Get the details on the inside pages. And right under the page, 3 stories there. One of them, NEMA confirms 9 dead, 10 injured in Kano gas explosion. Stories on page 2. As we've mentioned, more details as the days go by. So many other stories, but I'll let you do the picking when you pick up a copy. Okay.
And from News Direct, let's take a very quick look at the New Telegraph. The New Telegraph this morning has the big story, presidency, you can't dictate to us. Federal government tells NEF others, says members not recognized as leaders. And at the right-hand corner, you find another story.
What are the issues? You know, because sometimes we quickly leave the message and hit at the messenger. What are the issues? I think that's one of the conversations that we need to give a little more attention. I'm not saying I'm not for NEF or for FG, neither nor, as it would seem, but What are the issues being discussed? I think it'll be good sometimes to speak to those issues.
Well, we'll find time to look to explore it in depth, perhaps in the near future. Very quickly, as we wrap up, presidential aspirants, I won't retire from politics until I become president. Just giving us an insight into the weight of his ambition. I mean, on the first time he declared, he said it's his lifelong ambition.
Who's that from?
That's from Tinubu, former governor of Lagos State.
Well,
and
we'll keep going on another caller, but I guess the days are counting. And how many days to primaries? More details unfold on the go. And with that, we can quickly wrap up the papers and jump into the issues for the day right after now. Grab your cup of tea or coffee. We'll be right back.
While other countries are still in recession and fighting, we have since left recession. We only have 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. And since then, GDP has been positive and it's going higher. So these are good things that the country is doing that it needs to be applauded for. And one other thing is that this government is now doing more in terms of infrastructural development, but with less revenue available. Unlike when we had so much of revenue, but there wasn't any infrastructure to show. Today we see projects, we can touch the projects, we can feel the projects. Like the second Niger Bridge is no longer a story. We were told about it before. For so many years, it was budgeted for, but we never saw any pile come up. We never saw any pillars. But now, that bridge is connected from Delta to Anambra. So you can see it, you can walk through it, you can feel it. And this is at a time when revenues, like I say, have depleted.
Did we not have GDP growth of 3.98% in Q4? What is the impact on the people? What is the impact on businesses? I've just told you all the critical issues. We can sit here and be projecting, yes, oil price is increasing. There's a relationship between GDP growth and oil price. And so what? You go out there and tell the business person or tell the man whose purchasing power has been massively eroded that the GDP is growing. I mean, they will look at you in the face and wonder what you are talking about. We need to address critical issues of inflation, of the weakening purchasing power, of the depreciation in the exchange rate, of the terrible situation with energy. These are the very important things. We begin to talk of GDP growth, those things are becoming more academic, especially in our current circumstance.
And that's the controversy which we seek to try to unravel this morning. You just listened to the Minister of State for Budget and National Planning, Mr. Clem Agba, talking about how the country is out of a recession, unlike many other countries. We're recording some positive growth, etc., etc. And you've also listened to those in the real sector. Mr. Muda Yusuf wasn't mincing words when he was saying that that's basically an academic exercise. I wonder what our guest in the studio will have to say on both sides, whether he'll be able to find a line linking the two. Professor Magnus Pakol is Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center. He is former Chief Economic Advisor to the President and CEO of the National Planning Commission, and also a former Professor of Economics, University of Dallas in Texas in the United States. Prof, you're welcome to Sunrise Early this morning.
Thank you very much, Mapu. I'm always happy to be with you.
Well, you have listened to both gentlemen speak, one from the side of government, trying to explain just what government is doing and how this is affecting the overall numbers. But if you drill down, you've heard the complaint of Mr. Muda Yusuf, who's saying it's not really translating to much. This growth which you're seeing in the figures which government is talking about is not translating to much. Inflation is biting. In fact, there are those who say we're now in the period of stagflation and that there's very little to report in terms of actual growth for the masses and many more people being lifted out of poverty. We're barely saying that. What exactly is a disconnect?
Interesting. Well, basically, the problem we have in the country is the problem of not being able to produce goods and services, the goods and services that people of the world want. So if you drill it down, it's a human capital problem. So what that means is that we don't have the skills, we don't have the attitude, we don't have the behavior, we don't have a culture that is focused on producing goods and services, and it translates into the leadership. So you see, people want to be president, they want to be governor, they want to be whatever, but they are not really, in my view, concerned about how to raise output. And until you raise output, you don't raise incomes. And if you don't raise incomes, you continue to see the agony that you see in the faces of the people when you go to the villages. You go to the rural areas and you see people that look very different from people in the urban areas. You see poverty on their faces. Those guys are also literally underemployed. There is a way that we measure underemployment, and we use our statistical models and from the International Labour Organization and others, and we measure underemployment. But you could also measure underemployment by looking at what is happening, looking at people's faces and seeing this guy is suffering malnutrition. And if they are suffering malnutrition, then they are not going to have the full capacity to be able to produce the goods and services that people want. They may not also understand how to do it. So, underemployment is not just because you have a degree in something and you're doing something else, or that you're not able to do what you would have wished to do, but is that in many cases that you don't really have the capacity. In other words, you can't even, you're sick. You want to do a job, but you're sick. You're lying down in your house, in your thatch house. You don't have the nutrition. You don't have the health facilities and the means, to get yourself up to where you can be competitive with the people of the world. That's what the problem is. If you look at our leaders as they campaign now, they go to the urban areas, they go to the major cities, but the bulk of Nigerians are in the rural areas. They're not talking to them. So what they need to be talking about is how do we produce goods and services? That's what the problem is. Now, so we look at the inflation numbers.
Somehow, I mean, regardless of the fact that, I mean, you say that the major problem is how do we produce goods and services.
Yes.
Mr. Muda Yusuf is in the real sector. He certainly will tell you that, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has been trying its best. They are producing something, and he can read out a whole full scope sheet of the problems that producers are facing. It's not attractive to be a producer. The environment is really challenging for those kinds of people. So the question is, because government only sees itself in providing a role of infrastructure. I mean, when you listen to Mr. Clem Agba, who was talking about how there's now infrastructure, the second rail, line is now being produced. Beg your pardon. The second Niger bridge is now a manifestation.
Yeah.
It's no longer on the paper. The rail lines all over the country, there'll be talk around that as well. And then there's also deliberate efforts to try and soften the poverty, the effect of poverty on people who are really vulnerable through the Ministry of Humanitarian Services.
Yeah.
So as far as they are concerned as a government, they seem to be doing what they need to do.
Yeah.
But still, somehow, there is a huge deficiency in terms of what the real sector needs to be able to, really take off and thrive. From your own estimation, what more do you think that governments can do to really support the real sector, apart from building infrastructure, which is needed?
Yeah.
What more can they do to ensure that the real sector really is able to stand on its 2 feet?
Well, that's good. The point is, as you actually said it, there is grave deficiency in the things that we need to see done. So, yeah, it's true. I mean, you could build some bridge somewhere, but that doesn't provide jobs all over the country. I mean, you even see, they talked about the GDP rising, that we're coming out of recession. That's true. But 3.4% GDP growth rate, that just means that you are recovering. See, you have to look at where you were. You were at the bottom of the pit. You were in the pit. So you're growing out of a pit. You're not even on the surface
yet. Are we
yet.
really growing out of the pit?
Well, because you have a positive number. Anytime you see a positive number, it means that you are growing. But the fact of the matter is that I usually call that immiserating growth. You're still growing at a rate where it favors some people. So people see others doing well, but the masses are not doing well. And they then really can see their misery stand right in their face, because they see that these are the small number of people that are doing well, but they are not. That's what these kinds of growth rates do. But if you start to have growth rates in the 10% range, 12% range, then you're capturing a lot of people. So it's a matter of capture. How many people are involved in this economic performance that maybe the minister or somebody is talking about? That's really what matters. And the poverty rate we see in the country is mostly in the rural areas.
Should we be questioning the items that go up to measuring the inflation rate, even the items that go up in measuring the GDP, the general GDP? Should we be questioning the items in that basket?
Not necessarily, because they're the typical items that are used. The problem is that we need to rev things up in such a way that you involve a large number of people. That's other countries that have done very well. That's what they have done. In China, that's what they have done. They've been very intentional about creating goods and services that the people of the world want. I mean, if we look at our country, what are we known for producing?
You say
that's the thing. Because if I look at other countries, I can tell you what they are known for producing. If I go even within countries outside of Nigeria, especially in the advanced economies, I can see what particular cities are known for producing. We have to be known for producing stuff. If you're not known for producing stuff, then you will stay poor. And then the problem now that we have is that that's why the exchange rate is working against you. So you have a pass-through effect. You have your currency weakening. It passes through inflation, passes through into inflation in the country. Now, look, you can't have people be happy in a situation where food inflation is near 20%, and 20%. And then last year it was near 20%. And your income is not rising by 20% each time. So people really, that's what's hurting people. The statistical numbers, you can begin to say, oh, things are doing well. It's just like what fools people is, if I tell you now that, oh, inflation is trending down, but you go to the market and you say the prices are going up, that's true, because inflation is not, that inflation is trending down does not mean that prices are going down. It just means that prices are rising, but not rising as fast as last year. So that's what people are seeing. So people are seeing rising prices, whether it be 13% or 20%. They see rising prices on top of the rising prices of last time. What's going to stop that is the production of goods and services. So that is the problem.
Let me flip this conversation out to my colleagues in Lagos. Gentlemen and lady.
Thank you, Mokwe. Prof, let me begin, by even asking a question around some of the things that you have said. You've talked about the fact that a sizable number of people are not doing as well as the figures say. And that is something a number of people would consider quite troubling. Having headed or ran the poverty eradication program, or is it poverty alleviation program, what are the things that you would say are faulty in the structure of improving the economy? You have talked about the need for us to produce massively, and hopefully that would help to alleviate, you know, to at least to reduce the number of on the poverty rank or rung, as the case may be. What, in your opinion, is wrong with the structure of the economy that hasn't made it possible for us to produce and reduce the negative figures that we have: unemployment, inflation, poverty, and the rest of them?
So you want to discuss restructuring? Basically, that's
not
what
necessarily.
You
Not
say,
necessarily.
What is wrong?
Not necessarily.
But when you say, but it's okay.
No.
You're fine. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. You can stick with that. That's not a problem. Because you are right. Something is wrong with the structure. So the problem is that the federal government is too heavy, and it literally breaks everything it sits on. So it's too fat. So we've got to, it has to lose weight, and it has to shed some of that weight so that especially at the local government level, people can be more involved in the production of goods and services. I have to keep on chiming back to this production of goods and services that I keep talking about. Now, so at the highest levels of government, let's say at the federal level, let's just say at that tier of government, we think that we can solve all the problems of the country, but we cannot. We don't have the capacity to do it. And as you talked about poverty alleviation or poverty eradication, the only way the government can be really active and successful and efficacious with their measures is if they have the resources, but they don't have the resources. Government revenue is trivial, and so they are not going to have the capacity to be able to do the things that they want to do. The way to have the capacity, and I want every government leader to understand this at every level, is that we have to be very intentional, very clear, very methodical, very systematic about producing goods and services. We have to say, this is every person running for office, wanting to come to office, what should be in their mind is how do we improve on the skills of our people? And when we talk human capital, it's not that you just go to the university. I mean, you can, at the village level, even a person that never went to school can get something I call tax-specific human capital. You train them. We need to train Nigerians. Nigerians should be trained and developed. So it's not really just about training, it's training and development. Some of the very successful companies around the world, what they do is they do training and they develop them. That means that they tell them how to use the training to produce goods and services, to produce economic value. That is what the problem is with a country. If you look at the exchange rate, the reason why the Naira is suffering is because we don't have stuff that we can export to other parts of the world. That's what the problem is.
Why? Just one quick one, Prof.
Because we are not producing.
Is that the reason that the policies...
We know what the problem is.
Just a quick one, Prof.
I mean, when this government did come on board, oil prices were really low. Oil prices are oil is the mainstay of our own economy, and it's so bad that we don't even refine it. We export it in its crude form. And the prices were really low, so much so that we knew that we needed other sources of income.
Sure.
So we started diversifying. At least a little more attention was paid to diversification. And it was seen that maybe in the first year or so, there was some progress recorded in terms of, how the other sectors were doing relative to oil. Even till today, they keep talking about the progress that the non-oil sector is making. The question is, why haven't we been able to translate that into exponential growth?
Sure.
The kind of growth, if a sector is doing well, we'll think that by now we should have been able to, what's the word that business people use now? Is it expand that particular sector in such a way that it's able to accommodate more people? What are the challenges we're facing there?
It means the sector is not doing well. That's what it means. I mean, the non-oil sector grew, I think, somewhere a little over 4% in the last estimation. So 4-point-something%. But from where? From very low level. That's not good enough. You need to be growing at 12%, 10%, 12% in that range. If you're growing at 3%, 4%, okay, look at agriculture. The bulk of our population is in that sector of the economy, but it is growing at 2-point-something%. It has never grown near 5% in the last probably 10 years. So you can't really be talking about real productive activity if you're not growing at a very sharp rate. So you can't grow at 2.3% every time, every quarter, and then you say that there's growth in agriculture. So there's growth in the non-oil sector. It's true, there's growth, but it is not the kind of growth that we want. So the point I'm making is that it won't happen until you train the people. You also look at research and development. You know, there should be collaboration. I talk about 3 pillars. Collaboration between the academia, business, and the government. We should have these things at every local government office should have this arrangement where they are meeting with their people and saying, how do we project our local government to the world? That's why when he's talking about restructuring, I said, well, that's the point. The federal government should be more interested in their catalytic efforts. They should be ready to train people at the local government levels and at the state levels. That's where their effort should be concentrated. And because where the activity is at the local government level. But we neglect them. So we stay at the federal level and we pontificate and we do one thing and we pontificate on it. But that's not translating into anything substantial and meaningful to the guy at the bottom of the pyramid.
So basically, unless we are able to wake the local government up, we're going to be dancing around.
We got to train them because they don't have the capacity to do it. So we need massive training. What do companies do? The government should look at corporations. That's what they do. When you see the best corporations, what do? They train their people to be the best. So when you train the people are able to do it. Even the leaders should be trained. When you talk of leadership, it's a type of human capital. You have to know, you have to have the skills to be a leader. And you have to have the temperament, the attitude, the behavior to be a leader. So we need to build that kind of culture. A culture that promotes this can-do spirit, that is intentional, that is decisive, that understands how things work in the world. Your leader at the local government level has to know that he's competing with a person like him or her in another country. They're all pouring goods into the global market space. So he has to check, or she has to check, and say, well, what good is coming from my local government area? If he sees none, then he has a problem.
It's a real big problem. Yeah. I'm just thinking about the meetings that the federal government has been holding, because you talked about that tripartite, or let's say that tripod business, the academia. Right now, the academia is on strike. Right. We've also had the problem with security, which is a major problem, because when you talk about agriculture constituting a major part of that non-oil export, and we've been saying what is happening with security. Do you think that there's so much more that we can do in terms of reviving the confidence that people feel, or that people should feel, in being able to go back to the farms and invest in agribusiness to actually get that sector up and running?
So you have a vicious circle that comes again from this human capital problem. And then, so when people are not well trained and they don't know what to do and they can't produce goods and services, then they go to untoward behavior. So then they get radicalized. They become free radicals. They go out there and they cause all kinds of problems. And people who are looking to cause problems and make an income or expand their philosophy or ideology of that, they go and they hire these guys and they pay them well. And these guys kill 1 or 2 persons and they get promoted to be generals in their scheme. And these guys terrorize the masses. They terrorize the regular person. And the people are afraid. The people cannot go to their farms. And that's why we've seen food prices rise. It's not just because wheat prices have gone up in Ukraine. This is a problem we've been having all this time. I mean, how much do we really import from Ukraine? Not that much in terms of it to affect agriculture or food consumption in Nigeria. Not that much. Perhaps even import more from Russia than from Ukraine. But even then, so it's not because people try to say, oh, it's because they've heard people say on TV that people in Europe are having inflation prices because of the war in Ukraine. But that's not what our problem is. Our problem is fundamental. Our problem is the inability to find the leadership that can focus on this. And sometimes you get partnerships. I mean, it's something we don't really even talk about, is we need to look at our guys in the diaspora. We need to look at, let's say, African Americans that have skills. We need partnerships. I mean, it's like, we need to be able to talk to people outside that we can work with and say, how do we produce goods that we can sell outside?
What kind of partnerships would they be providing?
Well, they bridge the human capital gap that I talk about, so that you don't have to wait and go to school for 30 years and get 5 PhDs. You go to the guy who knows it in Chicago, that is from your village, that is successful in Chicago, and say, hey, come, we want to do such and such and export to Chicago. We're seeing that in Chicago, people are buying these kind of things. Can you come and help us and go home and do this? We have this partnership between business, university, and the government, and we want to be able to do it. He said, oh yeah, then he makes money, you make money, everybody's happy, we hire people. But the leadership has to be intentional about doing that. Because the regular guy is not going to just be able to get up and run to Chicago to go do that. I mean, I just use Chicago as an example. But you have to formulate, you have to have a leadership that understands that. A leadership that is prepared to learn. So if the leadership is not prepared to learn, then there will be no change. There has to be change.
Let me flip this now. I understand Lagos wants to come into this conversation.
Right, Mark, thank you very much. Well, Prof, if the leadership does not want to learn, let's try the followership, at least the followers. Let's see if we can help them learn this morning. And I'd like you to speak to this, the human capital conversation that you raised earlier on. So you have the average Nigerian staring at the inflation figures. Clearly, purchasing power has dropped. The wages income is not increasing. If anything, some would say it's even dropping. So how should the typical average Nigerian approach this economy? What should be the posture such that they can get the best out of it? So this is essentially trying to arm Nigerians with life skills to survive, this economy. What should they be doing?
That's a that's a wonderful question. The average Nigerian is really very ingenious, very creative. And when I talk about human capital, for example, it is not human capital just because you have a certificate or that you've got some training, but it is human capital because you're able to produce stuff. You're able to produce economic value. So every Nigerian should begin to then look at collaboration. Who do I collaborate with? I mean, you may be in Port Harcourt, but the guy you want to collaborate with is perhaps in Kano. You need to go find them. You need to, and that's why, again, you need some help sometimes from others as intermediaries. So, but people have to sit and say, how do I produce stuff? So if there's a message that I want to pass to folks, being that they're already creative and ingenious, sometimes I really get amazed, how we've been successful in Nigeria, and I think it's just because of the ingenuity of the people. The people are by themselves naturally very creative and ingenious, and they are doing wonderful things. I go on the shelves and I see new things that are happening by themselves. You got people who are providing their own electricity, 24 hours. Restaurants, they've got to run because you can't wait for NEPA, whatever they call it now, to come. So they got to produce their generator, they got to run their generator. The guy at any shop, if you're manufacturing stuff, you got to be running your generator. It's extremely expensive. The price of diesel is doubled, more than doubled from since last year. The price of kerosene is even worse. People don't talk about the price of what's happening with the price of kerosene. In like Bayelsa, the increase from last year is like 120-something% for kerosene. So so that they're able to still produce what they produce is amazing. So that my message is that just continue to do what you're doing. But the most important thing, there's one very important thing for the masses, and that is elect the right person. So if you don't elect the right person, then you're going to continue to be in this predicament. So if I was to tell something to the regular guy out there, be sure that you understand these guys that are running around looking for your vote and elect the right person.
Prof, before we get to the point where we begin to, consider who would be elected, the problems are still staring us in the face. And I'd like us to look at some of the whys now. Aren't some of these economic challenges self-inflicted when you consider that, Nigeria's debt-to-revenue ratio is at a whopping 85%? I imagine if I'm earning 100,000 naira, for instance, and I'm paying 80,000 naira every month as debt, can some of those funds be freed up, to fund some other critical sectors of the economy begging for attention?
I mean, how will you free them up? That's the problem. The reason why you're borrowing is because you ain't got it, because you don't have it. That's why a man doesn't go out and borrow money if he already has it. So they're borrowing it because they don't have it, because they cannot generate it. They can't tax it because the people don't have it. And then we're not very efficient. Again, another critical problem is the allocation of the resources. We are not very efficient in allocating our resources. So if you don't do that, then you're not going to get maximum output from it. Then you will not have money to use to pay on your debt or to create services, be it in health, education, or what have you. So the problem the country has, the reason we have the very high debt to revenue ratio is because, one, the revenue base is small. So if your revenue base is small, it tells me that your production base is small because you get revenue from production. That's why I keep talking about production. So we got to increase that. Then you say don't borrow. But if you don't borrow, then things collapse. So you have to borrow because you got to do the thing that you're supposed to do. So we are in a catch-22 situation. The problem if you borrow, the problem that you can't raise revenue. So again, it comes down to leadership. So that means go find the guys that you pick, that you believe can solve these problems.
From now,
and this is the time to do it.
From now till next year, because right now we know that we're entering the thick of a political season, how much progress do you think that we can make in terms of the projections that government initially had to lift 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years?
But it was a very good pronouncement to lift 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years. That's a very nice thing to say.
I'm just asking how much progress you think we can make between now and when they leave office, for instance.
Well, you can live one or two out of poverty between now and then, but you ain't going to be able to lift a whole lot of people because you don't have the capacity to do it.
So
the intention is good, but you don't have the capacity to do it is the problem. So we got to build the capacity. Well, luckily we said 10 years, so there's time. So, but it's something that can be done, but it's the number one antidote to poverty is jobs. So we have to have a society that's ready to work. So whether the work is by taking a job with somebody or by being an entrepreneur, but that's what you need to build, a society ready to work. When you have a society ready to work, then you're ready to compete with anybody anywhere in the world. And I think that that's what the focus is. So, I mean, we can go and be looking at the inflation numbers. Oh, it was 2% last year, then it's 15%. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, if you're not producing stuff, we can just keep reading those numbers. We know the numbers. Inflation is high. Food inflation near 20%. But headline inflation near 17%. So if you just recite that, what does that mean? So the thing is, how do we correct that? You correct that by producing stuff. And how do you produce stuff? By knowing how to produce it. If you don't know how to produce it, you cannot produce it. Therefore, we should be intentional about knowing how to produce it. And then we should find a way to educate the people. This insecurity is not always from the fact that the economy is bad. It's also from ideologies. So we have ideologies that then pervade society. So we have to do training there too, in our mosques and in our churches, in society, to let people understand that in the long term, this consumes everybody. So that's also very important. Not just looking at the critical economic indicators, but looking also at our culture and our behavior and our dogmas and doctrines and philosophies.
Well, certainly a lot of work to do, certainly a lot of work on our hands. We have to thank you so much for, laying it very bare and making it as simple as possible. Thank you so much for coming on this morning. Professor Magnus Kwakol is Executive Chairman, Economic Growth and Development Center. He is a former Chief Economic Advisor to the President and CEO of the National Planning Commission, and also former Professor of Economics at the University of Dallas in Texas in the United States of America. Thank you so much for coming on once again. We'll take a break now. We'll be back to continue this discussion with another perspective in just a moment. Please stay with us. Well, just before we go into the next segment, let's quickly ask you if you have registered for and picked up your voter card. That's the question of the week, as a matter of fact. We started asking you this question yesterday, and I did say that it's not a question that applies to just you. It's also applying to us presenters. Maybe we'll be asking our guests as well if they've registered for and picked up their voter card. We'll be asking our producers to tell our guests if they have, to perhaps bring in their cards to the studio and showing us. That's just to motivate everyone to be able to get their voter card and know just how serious this it certainly has implication for our national life. The fact that we need to exercise our civic responsibility. Have you registered for and picked up your voter card? If you haven't, the answer is right there for you. The steps you can take is right there. You have to visit www.cvr.inecnigeria.org or the nearest INEC office to you. Well, with that out of the way now, do not forget, pick up your voter card, register and pick up your voter card. If you haven't, that's the place to go to, the website to go to, or the nearest INEC office to you. So, Prof, yes, I have another professor here in the studio. Professor Ken Ife is a development economist. You're welcome once again to our studios this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Are you taking this process very seriously? Have you registered for?
Yeah, I have.
You have your voter card?
I do have.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but all of this has a bearing on the economy.
It's a civic responsibility.
Indeed. And the choices that we make at the polls eventually determine our fortunes economically. And there have been questions, even though those who are currently at the Home of Affairs now say, well, we've done our best. We heard just before we started the first segment, Mr. Clem Agba reeling out some of the progress that the administration has made, but you also heard the complaint of Mr. Mude Yusuf that it's yet to really be felt by the real sector. And that disparity continues. We've been told headline inflation is at an all-time high, at almost 17%, is worrisome for many Nigerians. And then I was just asking Professor Pakol whether he thinks that we need to take a second look at the items which are used to determine this GDP growth and also the items used to determine inflation. Because some will argue that it's a lot higher, and perhaps maybe if we took a second look at what is used to measure GDP, maybe we'll get a fair picture of why the average Nigerian is not seeing the growth which government says we're experiencing as a people.
Well, I've looked several times at the broad indices used and the classification of those into 5 broad categories. The headline inflation is a composite price index, which is an aggregation of all of them. And then the food sub-basket index is focusing on the farm gate, and then, of course, processed food. Both of them are in that. Then you have the core inflation, which is all indices, because they all have different focus. All indices put together minus food sub-basket index. And that mirrors the composite index. But in our own case in Nigeria, the food sub-basket index cruises at a very high level, which shows that is the major drag on inflation.
Tells the whole story.
But then the 2 other ones, number 4 and number 5, are the urban sub-index and the rural sub-index. They have still broadly the same categories, but the thing is that the urban tell you more, always higher than the rural, which tells you that is the theater of inflation. Because much of the imported goods, which carry imported inflation, are heading there. And much of the foods coming from rural areas are experiencing transportation barriers and high cost of transportation. So they're all pushing prices at the urban areas. So to go and change these indices, I'm not sure.
You think they already tell the story?
Sorry?
They already tell the story.
They tell the story.
They tell the story as genuinely as people are feeling it.
The thing is this. If you look at the targeting, World Bank was involved in designing this. And it could be very difficult to fault those. If you look at the thing, they measure cigarette, bread, basic items, the things we eat, everybody eats and everybody wears, the clothes they wear. They measure electricity prices, so diversity of things that affect every part of our life.
What about GDP?
Now the GDP, okay, if you look at the composition of the GDP, the broad compositions are okay. You have the primary sector, which is agriculture, industry, and services. And then you now come to disaggregation of those, which is now take the industry, break it down, petroleum industry, mining industry, then you come to the services, it goes really far, the ICT, telecommunication, all those banking services and all of that. Then the agriculture is, the four subsectors in agriculture, the crop production, the aquaculture, the livestock, and so those ones. Obviously, the crop carries over 80% or 90% is overbearing on the agricultural space. So I think the broad classification standard. We're following international standards.
And the weightings are also
we're using international standards in what we do. And NBS, as I told you, I remember when they were going through that, the lead economist, the Central and World Bank, I was meeting with him, and Nigeria subscribed to the very, to the international standard.
I'm asking this.
And we rebase. What we need to do is to rebase the economy, because we rebase at when Okonjo while I was there in 2012. And I pestered government then, and then because I felt that if we rebase, because the last time was 1999, and telecom sector did not explode by then, and many other sectors, creative and cultural industries, didn't explode, so we rebased, and then we saw a shift of 60%. So, and if we need to rebase now, but there's no guarantee that it's going to have a rise. It may even fall. But we need to rebase. It should be done every 5 years. So we need to rebase the economy right now and then see whether there is a fundamental shift in the base, and then whether we are going to have, because more sectors that have been made. Okay, for example, you may actually see these digital economies. Yeah, they will come stronger. And they are actually giving us more resources. That's where you get the most investment. That's number one in the world in terms of number, in the Africa, in terms of number, and in terms of equity coming in, we are number one. So that will push the figure.
They have recommendations. Part of the statements we were playing just before they came to this segment, a statement that, about the digital economy, that we need to find how we can get it across to all the 774 local government areas of Nigeria if we really want to see an exponential growth in that. Yes, we witness some exponential growth, but it's an enabler. It's small compared to what is possible in that particular sector.
It's an enabler, yes. I mean, remember I chaired the digital economy and bioeconomy and science, technology, and innovation in the National Development Plan. So we had cross-cutting goals that cross across the three. And then we now moved in to use this to underpin the entire cluster, high-growth clusters, and mapped it across. Because what we're saying is that innovation is applicable to almost every aspect, to all sectors. So there must be innovative ecosystem. So what we're trying to do to identify innovative ecosystem in every MDA, every sector of that subsector of the economy, and then make sure that it drives the innovation in the digital economy and drives growth. That was what. Otherwise, before, what we had was innovation in science and technology as a policy, and it wasn't being mainstreamed. And the second, they didn't have the resources to even, the research institute to even take it to incubation and take it to, so what we did was to take it out and say, okay, look, it has to be a cross-cutting theme. And we have to use that to interface with every high-growth sector, identify the innovation ecosystem there, and that's the approach that we took.
Let's flip this conversation to my colleagues.
Well, Prof, the mention of the local governments reminded me of something previous guest, Professor Bakol, talked about, and that's, the federal government. And in his words, it says, the federal government is too heavy, and whatever it sits on, it breaks. And I know we have talked about this perhaps for too long. But really, how much of attention do you think we should also be paying to that angle of the conversation that maybe it's just too big? We're talking rural areas. We have huge population, huge potential there. But clearly, from what we have seen from the figures, it looks like we're not just getting deep, we're not reaching out to them and ensuring their potentials are reached. So what do you have to say to this, conversation about the federal government being too big and whatever it sits on, it breaks?
No, I wouldn't actually go that far, but there is something to be admired if we can, resize the equation actually, to have more resources and more areas go down to state governments and local governments, and free local governments from the current trapping of their resources by the federal government. But they all boils down to capacity. You need to have the requisite capacity to manage, and then the integrity to deliver the goods. We are lacking on both, without a doubt. So even if you say to the state, carry everything federal is doing, you're going to still find that the capacity to do it and the willingness to do it. So there are lots of issues.
I'm sorry,
in our
Prof.
country, but we could do more.
I quickly need to follow up
by devolving some of the functions.
Right. Pardon me. I need to quickly follow up on that capacity question you raised, because it's important to clear this out. So are you saying maybe the local governments and even the subnationals don't have as much capacity to handle these things? But you see little estates here and there, how they sort their security, ensure that their ecosystem works well. So is it really a question of capacity, or just that reluctance to cede, resources, economic power, political power to the subnational levels? Because I don't think capacity is a problem, really.
Well, you could say that, but I probably wouldn't agree that we have. You see, the political system we have has entrenched mediocrity. And so you are not actually getting the best of our best 11 at local level, at the state level, and even at the federal level and various levels. We're not actually giving it our best shot. And then on top of that, you now have inconsistencies arising from governance issues and corruption, all kinds of things thrown on the system. So as P2B was saying yesterday, we just have a mentality of sharing things, just want to share things. And people don't think about saving resources, saving money, and then investing, and then in creating wealth. So that's the dichotomy that we have. And it is eating very deep into our socioeconomic system. We need to begin to find alternative ways of creating vistas of opportunities and challenge the status quo. But first of all, you've got to get competence on the line. There's no way you can do this. Human investment in human resources is abysmal. We should be doing 10% of our budget on education, 10% of our budget on health, 10% of our budget on agriculture. Those are recommendations of African Union. And we're not going anywhere near at all. I think it's about well under 3% on education, and the health is even half of that. And agriculture, some states are doing really well. I know some states that are doing 0.5%, not even 1% on agriculture. And we need to face the reality that the human resource, there are countries in the world like Japan, third biggest power. Tell me what raw materials they have, what natural resources they have. Investment in human capacity, and that is what is creating, that's what made them what they are, today. I mean, there are many economies like that. Okay, look at Nigeria. How many? We've dropped in our education system. Anywhere, look at our, but there are some few of us that are abroad are sending $26 billion into the country, much more than the whole revenue the country earns from oil or government revenue. So can you imagine if we give these children the minimum that they require, say for example, global digital literacy, and are able to work anywhere in the world, even from Nigeria, working for companies in the world, and if they go there, they can find it. You go talking about that remittance multiplying by 4 or 5, in the next 5 years, but we're not addressing that.
Prof,
not at all.
Some would say 10% to education, 10% to health, 10% to agriculture. 10% of what? 10% of whatever
No,
is
their revenue.
And if
the
what
budget,
is available
the budget.
is insignificant, it can't actually address much.
No, he's talking about 10% of their budget. And in fact, even the ECOWAS macroeconomic convergence criteria took it further. There are 10 macroeconomic convergence criteria. One of them says you should not invest less than 20% of your revenue on the investment, sorry, not less than 20%, which means it wants it to continue to create jobs by investing in economic activities and production. The second one says don't spend more than 35% on employment. In other words, don't overload the bureaucracy with people that you cannot have enough resources to invest and all that. So there are marks that are there. Of course, there are the macroeconomic ones like single-digit inflation, and there are 10 of them. And then even the borrowing, it says don't owe people. If you owe them, then charge interest in paying them. And that's number 6. So you have all these standards that are actually trying to narrow the gaps between the 15 member states as we move into a single currency.
Well, the point I was trying to make is that even if you met the 10% required allocation, it is 10% of whatever funding that is available. And if the funding that is available is inadequate, then that 10% can't really address much. But that's not where I'm headed, Prof. I'm glad you talked about taking the digital economy to the local government areas, and you have pretty much emphasized on building human capacity. And Professor Kwakol also supported your point, when he appeared earlier, when he talked about producing, the importance of production. But really, Prof, when we talk about production, how far can Nigeria go with production when it has not taken care of the problem of power? Power is significant. The real sector, for instance, makes up 48% of the economy. But if you haven't taken care of the problem of power, whatever economic revolution that you are going to record, wouldn't it be stifled halfway?
Without a doubt, you are absolutely right. The thing is that I keep saying, when you come to per capita of power, Nigeria is 4 times the population of South Africa, and then they have 10 times more power than us, which means there's a factor of 40 times. And then if you look at them with 58,000 megawatts, and Nigeria is still struggling with 5,000 megawatts. Look at Brazil, exactly the same population as Nigeria, and they have well over 258,000 megawatts. So you can see how many hundreds of times that are higher than Nigeria. So it does affect. It does affect. There are other ways you can go about it. We made some important mistakes in the past, but we can take power to the mass market so that you can unleash the potential of the private sector to provide power for themselves and then also to sell their excess into the national grid. But it's getting difficult to convince government of this. Everybody that has money and would want to invest in solar would put solar in his village, put in the nearest township, which could be Lagos, and then put in Abuja if that's where he's doing business. But he can only sleep in one place at any one time. So if it is possible for all the power being generated by his investment to go into the national grid and pay him, or even supply to the local people, they should do that. But it's getting it difficult to convince government that you should pay for that meter that takes that power from him. And then you should be able to give him back his money, or even a substantial amount of it. But that hasn't gone in. Even the misalignments in the entire power sector tells you that, explain to me why the man who is generating the power borrows money, borrows to pay salary, borrows to pay for his investment, and then also paying for the gas. But all the power he's generating, he only gets about 25% of the money from discos. It tells you the whole story about the misalignment. 50% of whatever is generated disappears as loss on transmission. It tells you the huge scale. Why should it always be one single national grid? Why couldn't people that could do it do some regional grids? Why couldn't people that could domicile their power to their local area? Why can't they do it? It's a state of emergency so that we can escape this. And then if you are looking at this, I want to tell you something. if you look at Nigeria, Nigeria is the highest tax, implicit tax in Africa. But on paper, we are the lowest. It's because when you look at an employer, he provides power for himself, he does borehole, he does his road and all that stuff. So that's why we're the highest cost location to do business. But at the same time, whilst we are 18% of the Africa population, 18% of Africa GDP, we're actually 48% of entrepreneurship in Africa. We have 42 million out of 90 million MSMEs in Africa. So entrepreneurship is a latent comparative advantage for Nigeria, but we're not matching it with advance in infrastructure. We're not matching it with the ease of doing business. So there's a disconnect.
Well, the question of competence comes back in. That's what you started with, and that's what Professor Wako also concluded with earlier. So the question of competence comes in again. Is it the willingness or lack of it on the part of governments to empower the people to develop human capital from the federal level to the local government level, or that of the policies that are not speaking to it? Exactly what would you say is missing in the economic structure of the country to get us out of the doldrums?
What is missing, you see, we have very good policies. Now, when you come to implementation, it collapses. Because part of the challenge in implementation is we have our own priorities. Government has its own priorities when they get money. For example, priority number 1, make sure you pay salaries. That's federal government. 2, make sure you pay pension. 3, make sure you service the loans, and the loans are getting very heavy. Then 4, security, you must invest in security. And then recurrent expenditures take priority. So by the time you come to October, December, they have done 100% on those area and the recurrent expenditure. The one that is back and the back burner is capital expenditure. And it's in the capital expenditure that you expect the jobs. So that will be about usually 40%, 50%, then gradually. So to try to increase, they will extend to Monday, January to March, expend the budget of the previous year to March, and now expended it to July, just to try to increase the spend on the capital. So you can even argue how much capital has been released this year for this year's budget. The question is that they're scratching their head, telling whether they've got anything or they haven't got anything. So it's difficult. Now, but the second thing is that why are we expecting government to do the things we know the private sector can do better? And that's the investment in human resource, investment in health. It's the private sector that will drive the health, because health means insurance. It's insurance that pays for health in America. You know that. And they expand. You go to UK, it's the same. And then so but we're not energizing, we're not releasing the space for private sector to come. And when they're coming, they have to bring with investment. And investment is the key for any economic development, because it is investment that creates economic activity. The economic activity creates jobs. Jobs give you disposable income. With the disposable income, you can pay for health, education, and poverty reduction. That's the cycle. But we just think that government can do everything. Government hasn't even got the resources to do it. Government's budget is only 7% of the GDP. So we're at the 93%. It's a domicile in the private sector. So we need to shift this argument. And then also, if you look at education, why is education so important? It's because Nigeria represents the bulk of the new workforce globally required. India has gone in. It's Nigeria that should be next, because Nigeria is the next big population following India. Nigeria and Brazil are the same. But we are the ones to provide a workforce for Europe, for America, for Canada, because their workforce is aged completely. Where in the age of below 35%, we have 65% of below 35 years old are 65% of our population, 165 million. But the same 35 years less is about 20% for the Europe. And so we're about 3 times more young people, and we're the ones to educate. That's why you see them doing this, what's it called, lottery or something. You think they're doing a favor. They do need the jobs so that you can come and work to pay the tax for them to maintain the old people that are all over the place.
Mm. Do you see those conversations taking front burner as we go into this electoral cycle, this next electoral cycle?
Yeah, I think this needs to be played up so that the politicians making their promises can catch on with this. And I'll tell you another thing, just that I still have the opportunity. If you look at the NNPC, if you look at our debt situation and NNPC, where you are, and all this subsidy removal or not the removal, or not removing anything. The NNPC does a crude swap, carry the crude to the refiner and get back money. I got back PMS. And if that was enough, giving you enough margin for them to pay for subsidy, they wouldn't be coming back to ask government to go and find 4 trillion. Can you imagine in our economic situation, they are looking for 4 trillion, you go and borrow 4 trillion to subsidize. That's, CBN has not received the money. Every month they should be expecting about $3 billion, and they haven't since January last year. And then you see JP Morgan deleting us from overweight category simply because they saw that 3 months ago they haven't received, but they didn't know that they haven't even received anything since January last year. So let's move this company to the market, capital market. Float this company, do an assessment of their asset, because I know based on the 1.7 million barrels a day or 1.6, that company is worth over 25 trillion. When you add the gas assets and physical assets, it will be heading over 35 trillion. Go to the market and ask for 40 or 49% to the people. Let the people buy the shares. What will happen is that you immediately rake over 15 trillion to sort out your debt, and then all the people who are busting the pipes and all of that are going to be shareholders in this company. The big companies and oil companies will be shareholders in that company. That company will become the most efficient company in Nigeria. Just as you have LNG, who complains about LNG?
I want to
LNG
ask
is
you
paying tax.
One quick question. Are you worried? I mean, we've seen all manner of, all different kinds of people, different people, showing aspirations to become Nigeria's president. Did Nigeria's economy take a toll when the CBN governor also? Were you worried about that? Not the declaration now, but the stories that he was also interested in becoming president of Nigeria.
Is he running? I'm not sure that he's running. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But we have far more critical
I'm just asking if you were worried, if that had any effect on the market. Did it
I haven't seen any effect on the market, to be honest, because Nigeria has that capacity to regenerate itself in any time of crisis. But let me tell you, we need to do with the structural factor. If we talk and talk and talk over the problem, we will never get to the problem. I've just given you something that we need to do on NNPC to actually make sure that we not only solve our debt problem, we'll stop more hemorrhage on our budget, and we'll stop more borrowing, but then get asset-based financing. That is what we need. Because everything we do is borrow, and you have very little talk about how much of your assets are you leveraging. And we need to leverage. And that's what Saudi Arabia did. They needed $25 billion. They didn't go to IMF.
Prof, we have to thank you so much this morning. I know that we can keep talking about these solutions. Thank you so much for coming on this morning. Professor Ken Ife is a development economist.
Thank you very much.
We'll take another moment. Now we're back to talk about another topic entirely. When we come back from this break, please stay with us.
Thank you for staying with us. For a quick update on the Kano explosion, we have with us the police PRO in Kano, Abdullahi Kiyawa. Thanks for joining us this morning. A number of people are wondering exactly what happened. Maybe we hear from you will be better. There are those who are still confused as to whether or not a gas cylinder explosion can cause damage of the extent to which we have seen. What can you tell us about that very quickly?
Good morning.
Morning.
Yesterday, that is 17th May this year, 2022, around 10 a.m. in the early morning hours, we received various reports through our police divisions, area commands, and even our command's emergency lines. We are called all that there is an explosion, sound of an explosion at Aba by Court Road in Sabangari, Kano, here. On receipt of this report, the Commissioner of Police, Kano State Command CP Samaila Shaibiduko FSI, immediately mobilized and led combined teams of the Command's Explosive Ordnance Disposal, Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Defense, and the Command's teams of Operation Pop Ada to the scene, located at number 1, Aba by Court Road, Sabangari, Kano, opposite a school called Winners Kids Academy. The scene of the suspected explosive led to a collapse of the building was immediately cordoned off, though there's a very large crowd in the area. At the scene, 3 bodies were immediately evacuated from there to Murtala Muhammad Specialist Hospital here in Kano State, where a medical doctor confirmed all the 3 dead, including a welder that operates a welding shop at the building that collapsed. His name is Mr. Ejike Vincent. Already yesterday earlier, preliminary forensic analysis revealed a suspected gas cylinder explosion. And since then, a rescue mission continues in order to bring about what is contained in the building. Though the rescue mission take all through the door, from the morning hours to the evening hours, and later on, more bodies were discovered. A total of 7 dead were recorded, including 5 males and 2 females. From our preliminary, it was discovered that the collapsed building...
Mr. Kiyawa, just a quick one. The report we have, the number we have from the National Emergency Management Agency says there are 9 bodies recovered, but you say 7.
Yes, these 7 were recovered. That is, after the first recovery of the 4, additional 3 were also recovered.
Is that to say the figures are now 10?
No, the figures are 7. That is what we were able to have with us.
Different from what NEMA reported as 9?
Yes, that is what we have in our record.
Okay. Well, we also saw, images of school children making their rounds. Can you tell us about that? How do the children come in, the school children come in?
The school is located opposite the collapsed building. And some students then were outside the school, and particles from the collapsed building falls on them. 8 children were affected. They sustained minor injuries, and they were all treated and discharged. Also, on our investigation, that the same collapsed building housed a warehouse, and the warehouse contained gas cylinders, chemicals, and other combustible materials, which ignited the explosion.
Well, we have to thank you very much for now, and expect that, as you have promised, more information will reach us as you receive them, so that we can, give more people. Abdullahi Kiyawa is Public Relations Officer, Kano Police Command. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
And to the issue that we began this conversation yesterday, and so let's take the second leg of it, and that is talking with Venerable DME Abilisi, who is a cleric and accredited conflict mediator, Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators. He joins us as well virtually this morning. Thanks for joining us this morning, Venerable. Well, you know everything that's been going on, especially concerning peaceful coexistence and all, and so many people are wondering, how did we get to the point where what happened in that high institution in Sokoto could happen? And how do we stave it off?
Well, we've come to the point in Sokoto, what happened on May 12th with the death of Deborah Yakubu, through basically not embracing what I call a culture of conflict transformation. When you look at conflict, you have conflict avoidance, which is the best way to put in place things that don't allow issues to come around. And then you have the management, then you have the resolution, and then you have the conflict transformation. So basically, conflict is just basically 2 groups or peoples who have perceived incompatible goals or differences. And what happened in Sokoto is just an expression again even though this time it appeared religious, of the various underlying conflicts in our national life. So we've had economic, like you've been discussing all morning. We've had serious political divisions. We've had fault lines in culture and communities. And so what happened in Sokoto was just, again, a religious face to part of the different national differences that we have, or that we perceive that we have as a people.
Venerable, when the incident occurred, the governor of the state appealed for calm and urged residents not to allow anything hinder or affect the peaceful coexistence that had existed between the Muslims and the Christians in the community. And something about your bio also says you have an experience of living in the North, which is why I want to ask that if it is, you know, said very often when things like this happen, that Christians and Muslims in the North had lived together peacefully in the past. How can peace sit on such precarious conditions such that when things like this happen, it spirals out of control? Doesn't it speak to the culture or behavioral pattern of some people that needs to change?
Well, I perfectly agree with you. That's a very good point. When we look at what we call conflict escalation, de-escalation, there's always, in a post-conflict era, what you call latent conflict. So latent conflict is what is very prevalent in northern Nigeria. So to live in northern Nigeria as a Christian is to say that if you take a wrong step in the market or in a school or in a hospital, you could ignite immediately a phase of conflict that could consume your life. And this is not the fault of government or leadership. It's just something that has not been inculturated into us as a people to tolerate one another, to respect each other's differences, and to live as one, irrespective of our backgrounds. So yes, the governor did make a quick intervention to his credit of declaring a 24-hour curfew and appealing to the community leaders to maintain calm. But then there must be post-conflict actions that will prevent it happening again or even escalating today. I remember that when the bomb blast happened yesterday in Kano, I immediately read that it was a suicide bomber trying to attack a Christian institution. Now, this is what conflict entrepreneurs do. They play on emotions, they escalate conflict for the benefits that they derive to the detriment of the people. And that's why communication management is very key in conflict resolution.
It looks like the whole environment or the conditions are ripe, sadly, for whoever wants to, take advantage of that to cause more division. Of course, get some profit at the end of the day from those precarious situations. So I'd like us to speak to those, situations that, make us vulnerable as a nation. And you hear things like, the Christian community, the Muslim community and all that. Yes, we understand that they're religions, but we need to also ensure that maybe perhaps Nigeria is number one, the fact that we are Nigerians first. I don't know how easy that will be to win us off the identity of, okay, I am a Christian, I am a Muslim, as opposed to I am a Nigerian first. So in order to transition to that point, what are those things you think need to be put in place to be done right now to ensure that at least we see ourselves first as, okay, maybe human beings, as Nigerians, rather than always, hiding under that umbrella of, okay, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, so I see things from that perspective. And since you're not, on the same page with me when it comes to those affiliations, then clearly we can't agree on issues. So what do we need to be doing right now?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just try to rush through a few submissions that I think will help. Number one is the Constitution. The Constitution is the ground norm. That's why we call it Constitution. It constitutes us as a people. Now, many people have said our constitution is faulty or not faulty. I'm neutral. I won't take any side on that. However, the section 14, subsection 3 of the 1999 Constitution as amended talks about the practice of federal character. We need to start to see in our national life, in the security services, in academia, in the public service, this federal character and merit enshrined. People should start to see that as a Nigerian, I can aspire to become whatever I want to be in the country without any limitation. Also, our constitution has a dual ideology. We talk about secularity in the constitution, but at the same time, we also isolate certain other religions and elevate them above others and make them superior. We need to deal with this because as long as people feel marginalized, there's a potential for conflict. Again, the zoning of leadership is another cause of conflict. You see the parties now having difficulty as people pick up nomination forms. Not difficulty in looking at the caliber of people who should run for office, but difficulty as to how they will zone. I think the PDP has thrown it free for all. The APC is still battling with should they go to the south or the southeast or the northeast. Now, this zoning is something that should be intentional. I know, like in Switzerland, the French-speaking, the English-speaking, etc., they rotate leadership, and the zoning is intentional. So again, the zoning of political office, and especially presidency and vice presidency, is something we need to look at to keep pace. Also, the devolution of power to the states. The economic speaker this morning talked about the role of the local government economy, and of course the capacity of those we have at the local level. If you give local government chairman today 1 billion naira each, I don't know if they have the capacity to spend it to transform the local communities. So that's another thing we need to look at. Then sports. You know, sports is an activity that unites people. I don't know how our football leagues are doing. I'm sorry about the football addict. I know that the European leagues are more prevalent in Nigeria than even the Nigerian leagues. Sports, basketball, table tennis, swimming, these are activities that unite the youths, that helps people to embrace and make friendships across borders. I know we had the National University Games recently, but we need to have more of such sport activities, because I know it's when Nigeria scores a goal at certain international events that we hear everybody shouting is a goal, and we forget that we're Yoruba or Igbo or Muslim or Christian. So sports is a very strong activity that unites people. And Mandela used that in creating a rainbow nation in South Africa. Also, the cultural integration in schools, in admission policies. I see a situation whereby northern universities are admitting more of northerners, and southern universities are admitting more of southerners. There must be a culture of integrating people from different ethnic backgrounds, so that right from the academia where they learn together, they start to mix together. I went to the Nigerian military school, and in my school, we had people, at least 9 people from all the states in Nigeria were taken in. And so today, I speak Hausa, I love Calabar people, I have Igbo friends, I have all sorts of colleagues. I'm an executive of the alumni, and when we meet, we don't know if you are from north, east, west, or south. All ex-boys are ex-boys. And so this also will have happened to those who went to federal government colleges. And I think that we need to look more about this cultural integration in our education policy. And it's very, very key, because in Sokoto, one of the things that happened was that the classmates of Deborah didn't see her as a human being or as an equal. They were merely accommodating her, tolerating her. And so when the conflict came up, that consumed her. Again, intertribal marriages. These are things that we don't promote. You know, so we don't have this myriad of culture coming together with the Igbos marrying the Hausas. We keep putting ethnicity and religion above all of this. But above all, the last 2 things I'll talk about is equity and justice, the rule of law, and then the national unity concept, the Nigerian identity. Who is a Nigerian? I I'm not sure I can answer that question. If until you go to the international fora, maybe you're in Cambridge University or in Oxford. I mean, I was hosted by the fellows of the Oxford University a few years back, and they were telling me that they've had Gowon, they've had Awolowo hosted there, and they were very happy to have me there. And at that dinner, they thought to ask me, a lot of questions about Nigeria and being Nigerian. And it was at that time that I started to understand that they really have the expression of who is a Nigerian.
Perhaps, Venerable, one of the questions to begin to ask from all the wonderful things that you have said is that of integration, which is the only thing mainly that can foster peaceful coexistence. You've had a stint in the north, even in the practice of what you are doing, and perhaps there are some sentiments or peculiarity sentiments in the various parts of Nigeria that people need to understand. How do you think we can get that done, understanding the peculiarities of our different ethnic localities, and live peacefully, coexist peacefully as a result? How do we take that on?
Perfectly. We have the perfect solution: the National Orientation Agency. That's all. That agency is asleep. That agency should start to orient us. I remember it was, I think it was Dora Akilui. We had the Great People, Great Nation slogan. The National Orientation Agency needs to play up with drama, with social media, on Instagram. Who is Nigerian? What are our foods? What are our cultures? What are the lines we shouldn't cross? If I go to Kano, for instance, I will dress in a particular way, I will act in a particular way. And even though I don't need a visa to go to northern Nigeria, mentally I put on a visa when I go there, because I know that there are certain things I shouldn't do in the market and I shouldn't say. And when northerners come to the south also, they should respect it. The basic thing is that we need to respect each other's boundaries. And the National Orientation Agency will go a long way in telling us, what do the Calabars respect? What do the people from Niger State respect? What do the people from Taraba, Jukun, Tiv? We are a multi-ethnic nation. We are a melting pot of over 300 tribes and languages and different religions, different faiths. Even in Islam, we have the Sunnis, we have the Shiites, we have the Sufis. And the National Orientation Agency needs to go to the primary schools, the secondary schools, universities, the car parks, the motor parks, the streets, the radio, the airwaves, and tell us how we should live together as one.
Okay.
Nobody is telling us that.
It's interesting. Well, we have to thank you very much this morning, Venerable, for bringing some of these issues to the fore. Hopefully from this conversation, those who need to take their pick will do that, and the rest of us will follow suit. Venerable Adeyemi Agbelusi, cleric and accredited conflict mediator, Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. And I wish we all keep the peace and show love to one another. We are all one Nigerians and we have no other home.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just before we take your own messages, that question one more time needs to be asked. Have you registered for and picked up your voter card? If you have not, that's what to do right there on your screen. cvr.inecnigeria.org or the nearest INEC office next to you.
Oh, that's right, and it's free of charge, right? So just in case. But let's take a look at your messages now. We'll start with this tweet from Festus Kimboyewa, and this is what he has. While FG can be commended for investing in infrastructure, it has failed to tackle our biggest economic challenges, which are abysmal productivity, poor living standards, lack of economic opportunities for our young people, poverty, and weakness in our tax system.
Professor Enagena also has an interest in the economy, and he says we must completely deregulate the economy to encourage investors, fix our multi-taxation regimes, and stabilize the power sector by fixing the refineries. This will drive down the cost of production and boost our exports to shore up the value of Naira. Wish it was as easy as he said it. Ayo.
Well, Akko Omodo says, oftentimes it appears that technocrats confuse us when they find themselves in power. It's possible that they merely rely on textbook knowledge, thereby ignoring the real issues. Under the Obasanjo era, they voted huge funds for Keke Napep. Has it eradicated poverty? Well, I know he's raising that because of Professor Magnus Kwakol, who it would seem was one of those who brought in Keke Napep over trying to eradicate poverty. But there's also this one from Kenneth Abiro, who says it's baffling that in this 21st century, constant or steady power supply is still Nigeria's headache. I am appealing to our political leaders, please let there be light. Steady power supply, no doubt, has a big role to play in economic growth. Well, I certainly can join your appeal this morning, Kenneth. Let there be light. That was the first thing God created, and that was the first thing he said, let there be light. So it's a fine place to leave it. I think that we all can be light today, wherever it is we find ourselves. Let there be light. You be the light. Thank you for watching. I'm Markwell Gwingiso.
Oh, Markwell, you just inspired me today to be the light. Thank you for that. I'm Kairi Okikiolu.
And remember, we're born neither Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa. We were born understanding the language of love, and we should all learn to love. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimo. Thank you for watching.
So take the light on today. I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.